Okay, so our second speaker of the day is Mr. Donald Nyarota. He is the Communications and Advocacy Officer at the Center for Natural Resource Governance, and he uses his background in journalism and civic engagement to spotlight the intersections of wildlife conservation, environmental justice, and human rights. And he's going to be sharing his insights on how extractive industries like mineralized conservation, community exclusions, all those kind of things impact Zimbabwe's protected areas. So I'm going to run through Donald's key learning outcomes before I invite him on. So we're hoping that after this session, you'll learn how to explore fortress conservation and how that affects Indigenous communities through displacement and exclusion. Also that you'll be able to understand the role of political and economic power in shaping conservation outcomes, critically assess community-based approaches like campfire and their limitations, and finally to embrace justice-centered conservation as a necessary shift for equitable and effective wildlife protection. Donald, welcome. It's really great to have you on.
Thank you so much for having me. It's such an honor to be, presenting and participating in this online conversation on wildlife conservation. And you have introduced, my name is Donald Nyarota. I work with the Center for Natural Resource Governance in Zimbabwe. And we are a civil society organization whose work is centered around justice and dignity for communities that are found in areas where there's extraction of minerals. And you find that in most cases, such areas also then house wildlife conservancies and wildlife parks. So I'm going to be presenting, I just want to highlight the work, maybe the next slide, the work that we do is CNRG. Our work is centered around 5 key pillars, which is gender and extractives, because we realize that when there's extraction, there is a gendered impact. We are also into climate change, working with communities in the resource areas where communities are facing challenges, livelihood challenges, food security challenges. And our work also is broadly on mineral resource governance. And I will not delve much into that, but we are also doing work around ecosystems, wildlife, and forestry, which is maybe the core of this conversation today. And in that, we recognize that our wildlife is our heritage, is a part of our natural resources, part of our wealth, which should be sustainably utilized to benefit not just the government, but also the communities at large. And we are also working around land and water because we realize that all of these activities that we are talking about around the issue of land, where the land is central, because there cannot be any mining, there cannot be any wildlife conservation without the land. And access to water is really something. And this aquapolitics is something that is going to rise to the fore as we are facing these climate variabilities. So the issue that we have here is that Zimbabwe, why we are talking about wildlife conservation and what is at stake, we are seeing that Zimbabwe's wildlife is tangled with politics and power. And despite the fact that we have got a very good global image as having for elephants, which a really soft spot for me and for us as an organization, because we see that as an endangered species, it's something that is really under siege. And we are also seeing that communities that are close and adjacent to protected areas, they are bearing a disproportionate cost from displacement, violence, and this is also happening under the fortress conservation regimes, where wildlife seems to be trumping the communities around such wildlife conservancies. And the fact that these have coexisted, and if you look at this from a holistic point, realize that indigenous knowledge systems were also in place to ensure that communities, even in such areas, could coexist. And the costs, the displacement, the violence is something that we are looking at, is because our work is centering around the justice, community rights, and in our discourse, we are pushing for equity in terms of land tenure rights. Communities are not really at the center of this conversation, and so the issue really here, as we are speaking, is that there is what we call militarization, and in fact, this militarization and securitization of access to resources, the conservation, concept is that there is a lot of dominance, and this there's what we call neoliberal influence, which has become pervasive in terms of how it is prioritizing corporate interests and other state control over the community-led initiatives and the environmental sustainability. I will talk about campfire as we go on, but we are believing that we believe that whenever resources, whether they are mineral resources, wildlife resources, are there to be protected, if communities do not participate in that narrative, it means that the efforts are not sustainable. And we are saying that this is also reflected in the poaching or the crisis narrative, which obscures the structural injustices that are there. Because, like we are talking about the communities that are adjacent to the wildlife parks, how much they are suffering. In the next slides, I'll also share some key statistics from the Zimbabwe parks on how, what in terms of land, livestock, in terms of fields, in terms of food that has been under threat from the incursion of wildlife. And this is also the issue that we are saying, that sometimes communities may want to take the law into their hands, and they attack and kill the wildlife because there is low response or slow response in terms of the authorities to come in and address the situation when communities make reports. I will give an example. In Manicaland, to the east of Zimbabwe, recently there was a spate of killings by a lion that escaped from a wildlife conservancy, and it took more than 4 weeks for the Zimpacs to kill that. But about 15 cattle died, and the community now was now organizing themselves into bands and night vigils to guard their livestock. And this is an issue that we are also concerned about. And there are also financial interests that are way local concerns. And in the realm of wildlife conservation, global financial interests, the issue of trophy hunting, that's a real concern. And we have trophy hunting, in as much as it is generating income for low-income countries like Zimbabwe that also relies on a large long tourism. But we are saying that when communities also want to participate, there is no discretion in terms of the amounts, in terms of the fees for participating in hunts for communities, so that the communities which may largely want to hunt for sustenance and food security, but we have other interested parties just coming in to hunt and for a trophy. That's another debate that we are also looking at, and we see that these are challenges that are facing wildlife conservation. So maybe also to just look at the global efforts which are we complement at a local level, that we have the protected areas and national parks, which is a legacy initiative that has been there for quite long, because we realize that it is very difficult for humans and wildlife to coexist within the same area. So the issue of protected areas in national parks is something that we truly support. And in our work, we've always been engaging constructively with the Zimbabwe National Parks Wildlife Authority, because we realize that such wildlife is important. And we also have the CITES, the Convention of International Trade on Endangered Species. I had a conversation with one person from the western parts of Africa, when they were talking about, as we were discussing, I was saying that we have, in the southern part, we are so privileged to have this heritage of wildlife, because their endangered species vanished over time, because there was no real, political will from their governments to protect And these also then talks about the issue of anti-poaching laws and enforcement. And I think there is need for strengthening global cooperation in terms of stopping this, because there was a time in Zimbabwe when we had a challenge with the influx of Chinese that were fingered in poaching circles. They were part of a mafia that was poaching and killing elephants. There was a lot of elephant poisoning around that time, and this is an issue that we always talking about. And the issue of wildlife rescue and rehabilitation is a real challenge, because we also had an issue where elephants were being transported to China, young cubs, young calves being transported there, and this we felt that this was not being done properly, because they're going into zoo, being taken out of wildlife, their natural habitats. We would rather have a situation where they are kept there. And there's also an issue, even as I'm going through, I'll talk about the carrying capacity, the elephant head that we have, that is being touted as being too much in terms of carrying capacity in our country. But we believe that wildlife are transboundary in nature, and they are not docile to one locality. And this argument may be erroneous, and I think there is real need for scientific investigation to see that is our wildlife too much in terms of the carrying capacity. And you look at some of the statistics that I put there, and they are coming from the Zimbabwe Wildlife Zimbabwe Parks, Zimparks, which is saying that between 2019 and 2023, there are around 300 fatalities and over 300 injuries that were recorded in human-wildlife conflicts. In my other work, which is purely humanitarian, we are helping some communities in the eastern part of Manicaland, where some are being attacked by wildlife, and we are then looking for machines and walking chairs, walking aids after they are attacked. And this issue is there. And we are saying that there is real need to look at this, to say, when we are having over 300 fatalities, this is a cause of concern. And it means that our wildlife narrative is also about improving the infrastructure around the wildlife conservancies. And if you realize that over the years, there's been a destruction of infrastructure, the perimeter fences, there's not been any investment in improving, in maybe introducing electrical fences that dissuade animals from crossing into human habitats. That is very important. And given this these staggering statistics that at least 300 people, and we are saying 138 cattle, livestock has been affected. And this, for us as Africans, we view cattle as part of our intergenerational wealth. When such is destroyed because of wildlife, then it means that there is a need for a rethink in terms of how we approach this conservation. You also see that we have an elephant crisis. So this is where we are saying that we need to interrogate this argument. And government is saying that our carrying capacity is 40,000 and we have 55,000. But the scientific research that has been done has not been done by government. And it seems to refute the claims that we have more than 55,000. At last reading, I had an animal survey that was saying that we have around 43,000, 48,000. But this was being head that were counted at watering holes, and which might, over a time, which might not be accurate to a T, but it gives a general estimation of the kind of wildlife that we have to the watering holes. And you would also realize that in terms of this, there is also the distribution of this is that this is really concentrated in Wanga. The wildlife, the elephant head that we have in Zimbabwe, about 45% is concentrated in Wanga. And we are saying that maybe in terms of our conservation efforts, the elephant in the room is that we have one park that is carrying almost half of the elephant head. Why do we not translocate to other parks to other, jurisdiction in Zimbabwe, so that the wildlife is then, transferred to other parts of the country, and other parts parts of the country can also benefit from the wildlife. This is our argument to say, let us not export our wildlife in the natural wealth, but rather let's translocate within localities, even if it were necessary, maybe to look within the Southern African region to say maybe we can translocate within the similar climate, within similar, flora, so that we get the maximum benefit as a regional block from our wildlife. So the other issue is that whenever there is the fortress conservation in practice, what it does is that it on indigenous groups, it restricts access to ancestral land and criminalization of traditions. There are certain traditions in Matusadona, in Gunarejo, in Hwange, the communities have certain ways of celebrating their customs. They have certain ways that they have. But we believe that responsible tourism should support, a conservation effort by funding wildlife protection, while also promoting ethical interaction with nature and reducing human impact on ecosystems. We want communities to be coexisting with conservation efforts. They should not be outside the realm of conservation, because we also believe that the communities which are facing conservation land dispossession is something that is a key concern, because we are coming from a colonial legacy, a colonial past, where these communities were moved from areas which were really fertile and to areas that were not so fertile, but we have got this vast land that has been left for wildlife. So why don't we then integrate communities in wildlife protection? And Devin, as you are doing this, as you move to the next slide, you realize that as a Center for Natural Resource Governance, we working with the communities to resuscitate the communal areas management program for indigenous resources, the Campfire, which was a conservation program that was introduced around the 1980s. And that was really looking at how to conserve wildlife and natural resources in communal areas, while also providing benefits to local communities. So this is about sustainable natural resource management, because you see that without sustainability and responsibility in terms of any anthropogenical activities, there is risk that resources may run extinct. And the wildlife, like I said, in West Africa, they used to have them, but it is all gone because there was no responsible and sustainable way. And we are looking at these community-based natural resource management programs is something that needs to be rethought. And in Hwange, we are resuscitating the Campfire program, working with communities around the Hwange National Park, in Lukosi Village, working with communities in along the Deka River, because we want the communities also to benefit. But of course, there are limitations, because this community-based natural resource management, the CBNR program, is faced implementation challenges. When it was introduced, it was really something that was that got a lot of funding. But when the funding dwindled, the government did not come in and to resuscitate the projects. But there were also challenges with that. There was limited community control and decision making. All decision making was then superintended by local authorities, whose local authorities are an appendage of the central government. And where the central government does not have political will, it then means that the control then falls out of the hands of the community, and there's also inequitable distribution of benefits. So in this, there were also quotas to say when there are trophy hunts, when there is wildlife that is also killed, maybe for food, communities would get quotas that they can also then utilize and leverage on. But these benefits were not really trickling down to communities. And then after that, there was a lot of politics, and communities then, because they were part of the Campfire project, were now being sidelined, and there was a lot of political posturing. Some representative of government also took in, and they started prioritizing participation of other groups or other persons which were not the real and bona fide community members. And this is always a challenge, that when you are getting communities involved, do we get the correct and rightful representatives of the community over those that may also be imposed by authorities. We've also then done a spirited campaign resisting the culling of elephants. We issued a press statement together with about 80 civil society organizations, as you can see in the slide. In September 2024, the government of Zimbabwe wanted to cull about 200 elephants. It was also being done. Namibia also wanted to do it, and I've also shared within in the presentation some of academic researches that we commissioned to look at alternatives to elephant culling. What are the real alternatives? And we said in our arguments that elephant culling cannot be done under the auspices of that we want to feed communities, because government was saying that we want to then use the meat to then distribute it to the communities. And we are saying, how many people were going to be fed by 200 elephants when we had about 2.6 million people who were food insecure, according to the Food and Agriculture Organization, after the El Nino drought. And government wanted to kill 200. We believed that this was part of a sinister plot by government whose interests were not really about elephants, but about other things. And we are always suspicious because we speak to power, and question whenever decisions that are made, are they going to be benefiting communities? We have also then looked at, there's always been an argument which is not really founded on any evidence, that when the natural conservancies, the wildlife parks were being pegged and set, in those areas, there are minerals. And we have seen that there's been a lot of interest from the Chinese. And in particular, with this case that we have with Sun Yifeng, which wanted to have, which applied for an exclusive prospecting order from government and to start mining in this Namatela area, which is an ecologically sensitive area and forms part of our critical wildlife corridor. Because, like I said, the wildlife is transboundary, and we believe that this is inimical to the protections that are provided in the Constitution according to Section 73, which guarantees the right to environment. And we are saying that in part of our arguments is that we want sustainability and intergenerational justice. Future generations can actually use the hydrocarbons. Maybe let's just keep them underground, because we are also moving to a net zero trajectory in the world. Why do we want to keep on investing in fossil fuels? And in fact, we have other areas which have shown that they are, resource rich in terms of coal, but these are not areas that government is looking into. And this is part of the campaign that we did. We objected to that. And the Zimbabwe Mining Affairs Board called for a meeting, which we also presented our oral, objection to say that we want responsible mining, and we do not want mining that is going into national parks. The other campaign that we also carried out was around Chimanimani National Park, where there was influx of artisanal mining and gold panas. And we want to be also objective and applaud government for stepping in to stop that kind of mining, although still mining is continuing in alluvial bodies, which are also part of the wildlife in terms of the aquatic life. It's something that we continuously object to, and we continuously raise this issue. Justice that we're looking for in terms of conservation is about redress and recognition of land rights. This is an issue that we have. When we're talking about mining, the challenges that we have is that communities have no land rights. The land rights are invested in government. And government, instead of doing constructive consultation, they just do consultations to just tick box and not really using the free, prior, informed consent principles, which are supposed to be part of the real principles that underpin consultations. And we want this redress. We also want to move beyond token inclusion to real power sharing. we have got our traditional chiefs, we have got our traditional leaders. We need to invest in indigenous knowledge systems. I liked what was being talked about bees and about chili burning. Those if you really investigate, you will see that there is a close link to our indigenous knowledge systems. And if we then invest in power sharing, in not just token inclusion, we then move to where communities are also really involved. And we want to move beyond extraction. Conservation, the conservation effort that we have are just about extraction, where we have tourists coming into the country. Some communities are not even benefiting. There was a time when an elephant died, and we had communities outside Zimbabwe, lamenting and crying over a lion that Zimbabweans did not even know. It's because of the extractive nature, and this extractive nature is coming from a point where we are just exporting our natural resources and not adding value, not ensuring that communities are benefiting. Even our tourism, do we have a domestic tourism quota? Are we investing in ensuring that the communities can also benefit from their tourism? So this is the future of wildlife conservation, which is justice-centered. And this is not optional. It is very urgent because, like I said, wildlife is extinct. We have got endangered species. That's why we have the global CITES program. And without reform, protected areas risk becoming zones of suffering. We are creating sacrifice zones, suffering zones, where human-wildlife conflict continues to persist. And this, unfortunately, is where conservation continues to mirror mining, and the extractive logic dominates, where we are taking raw materials to be value added somewhere. We do not want that with our wildlife. We want our communities to be benefiting. We want our community to be adding value. Whenever there is ivory that is harvested, why don't we invest in downstream industry that adds value to our ivory instead of just exporting it, instead of taking it over to China, to other jurisdictions without involving the local private sector? We need to rewild our imaginations and policies towards coexistence and equity. And I cannot overemphasize this point. And we want also that conservation should be a liberatory and reparative practice. And in this reparation, we are talking about communities also benefiting, like was prescribed by the Campfire Project, where communities would get quotas, would get an access to the wildlife wealth. And thank you. Together we can make a difference for our wildlife. This is my little 2 cents and input to this conversation, a very important conversation. And thank you so much for having me.
Thank you very much, Donald. That was really fantastic, and well done for fitting such a massive amount of information into a very short time. I wish we could go on forever, but we've got so many wonderful speakers today. Okay, so we do have one question in the chat, and that's from Panache Mundandishe. I really hope I'm not butchering that. So when one says the local community is barred from hunting, do you mean that these communities can pay the same value as other hunters? Or rather, when numbers permit, there is a need for culling exercises that will have meat harvested for the local communities to benefit from?
So when we are saying that communities are bad, the barring is, it's not instructive, but it is implicit in that the amount that is charged to hunt is really discriminatory. Communities, we are talking about communities in low-income areas, in our rural areas, who cannot afford the amounts that are there. And we would rather say that if there are numbers, the numbers continue to grow because the communities are not involved in the conservation efforts. When communities are able to track and are involved, they can tell and assist the conservation efforts to show that in this area there is an influx of a certain problem animals that can then also be then translocated to other areas. Like I said, 45% of our wildlife here is in Hwange, but we have got other national parks which do not have wildlife, which do not have elephants. So we would rather have a situation where before we start culling, we look at other, methods to, address the issue where there's human-wildlife conflict. And in fact, if for elephants, I will tell you that when an elephant is involved in a human-wildlife conflict and it kills someone, immediately the herd itself starts to distance itself from that elephant, and then it becomes easy for the wildlife rangers to just pinpoint that this is a problem animal and it can then be killed. Or maybe we are trying to address an influx of a disease, we can then pinpoint areas where there is need to cull. But culling should be the last resort and not the first port of call in terms of addressing influx or maybe the increase in numbers of wildlife population.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. So, Donald, I know that you are actually at another conference, so thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today. We really appreciate it. I'm not seeing any other questions, and I know that you have to go. So I think we will let you go, and I'm not sure if you'll be able to hang around and answer any questions in the chat. But we really, really thank you so much for your time and your expertise. And it was so great to have you on the session. So thank you very much.
Yes, Tilly, and just one quick thing. I think when before I started making my present, there was a question around trenches, and I think trenches are a way, if they are in they are recommended depths and length in terms of discouraging elephants from crossing in. I know from Wange, at Wange Safari Lodge, there is a huge trench that is there, and but there are also pools to attract the elephants, but there is a trench that dissuades them from crossing. And I think that is also another way that communities can protect their habitats from wildlife crossing into them and protecting their livestock.
Great. Thank you very much for commenting on that. That's very interesting. All right. So